Well, let's have some fun. This episode 3 opens up with the whole Wendy Richter stuff. And I got to tell you, Wade, I was kind of surprised there was even a reference to this. I knew we had to talk about the Montreal screw job, but a lot of younger fans don't even know the Wendy Richter story. Were you surprised to see that included, Wade?
By the time they got to it, no. I mean, it felt like they were not shying away from covering everything, especially things relevant. And I think it's good for context to know that that's something that happened before.
I was a little
Yeah.
surprised only because so much of this doc was things that we'd heard of and seen before. I mean, virtually all of my footage came from an interview I did about a completely different subject that had nothing to do with this project.
Oh, wow.
And there was a lot of that in there, or enough to matter. And since I hadn't seen anything that WWE had done on Wendy Richter, I was kind of like, I was pleasantly surprised, by the way, because I think Wendy doesn't get quite the credit she deserves. You know, she was really kind of a transitional talent between the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, when I don't think that the audience really took women wrestling that serious. It was an attraction, and there were some performers that definitely went out there and had great matches. But for the most part, it was I don't want to say eye candy because that wasn't the case very often, but it was just an attraction. You'd see them every once in a while, like dwarfs and that type of thing. But Wendy performed at a much higher level, and she was there. Not that she performed at a that much higher level, but she was there at that critical time when women really started becoming more important, I think, at least in terms of what I was watching at the time.
I thought it was interesting that they closed that conversation to sort of open the episode with Vince saying, it's not personal, it's just business, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for our business. That sort of sets the tone for the whole documentary a little bit, doesn't it, Wade?
Absolutely. I mean, he said it's show business. I write the script. I gave you the belt. It's my decision when to take it off. It's my property. So, I mean, I think it was important for context that what happened with Bret wasn't the first time ever. And, every situation is different. And I mean, it should be judged on its own merits in terms of the context of it. And both situations, well, I think the Wendy Richter thing was probably a little simpler. Bret was a little more complex because there was just a longer relationship there. I mean, Wendy Richter getting a big push was when I first, right around the time I first started getting WWF television, maybe a little bit afterwards, in the Twin Cities area where Eric and I are both from. And, I assumed she was a big star, she was on the cover of the magazine. She got a big push. And she was, but she wasn't a huge success given the big spotlight she was given. I remember being at a WWF house show and Hulk Hogan, if I'm recalling correctly, wrestled right before intermission, which he often did. But I know for sure Wendy Richter closed out a show I was at, and it wasn't electric. I mean, there was little something about her as a main eventer that just wasn't quite where it needed to be. That said, I think it was smart to do, and I think it was actually something Vince McMahon deserves praise for. Obviously, everything he did because he thought it was good for business, not because he wanted to be woke. But I think pushing, the women's division in a different way, and treating women in a main event spot and the women's title in a main event spot was progressive, and I think helped, lay a bit of a foundation for what was to come later.
And Wade, when did you start writing The Torch?
1987.
So you started The Torch the same year I started working for Vern.
Yep.
And the first time I ever saw Wendy Richter was in Rochester, Minnesota, when we were producing the show for ESPN.
I drove down there all the time. Those are fun.
Yeah, times. And I think I interviewed her once or twice there. And that was my first exposure to her, really.
Yeah. And I mean, she was good. She just wasn't great. I think, today she would have a job and get TV time, but I don't think she'd just be like, oh, we got to push this person ahead of everybody else. But I mean, like I said, I think there was a lot of pressure for her because, I mean, she was being compared. She was the women's Hulk Hogan in terms of the push. I mean, she didn't get quite the Hogan push, but you know what I mean? She was put in a position as the women's world champion, and what Vince was trying to see if he could turn her into a main eventer.
Wade, of course, the entire wrestling world was covering everything that was happening with the Vince McMahon trial. Were you in attendance for any of that?
Yeah, I was there longer than anyone. I was there from jury selection through closing arguments. I actually flew back in the middle, wrote a double issue of the newsletter, and then flew back. And so I was there for like 2 weeks and then another week.
So I can't wait to get your perspective of this, because we're going to talk about the pretty tense moment where Hogan is getting ready to take the stand, And Hogan describes it as, being very uncomfortable being in the same room as Vince. But it's almost positioned like Hulk was sort of crafty with the government and defended Vince. You were in the room. Did that feel like a big twist and a big bombshell based on expectations that the mainstream media had that Hogan was going to be the star witness?
Yeah, this was accurate. I mean, I lived it in real time. Everybody thought Hogan was, Hogan's aligned with WCW. Vince McMahon is on the ropes. As the documentary said, Hogan's thinking, you want to align with the person or the company that maybe is going to be around and pay you a lot of money. And so for all kinds of reasons, the belief was Hogan was a government's witness. He was given immunity. They were confident he was going to say something that was going to, be very influential with the jury finding Vince McMahon guilty. And I was in that courtroom, and everybody, when Hogan started testifying, were kind of looking at each other like, is this what the government wanted him to say? And by the end, you could see the body language on the prosecutor, Sean O'Shea, and his assistant. They were looking at each other, and then they kind of, they didn't want to sell anything. I mean, if you watch real prosecutors, not TV prosecutors, they generally look bored. They just don't want to draw attention from the jury and the witnesses. But you could just, I watched them closely the whole time. I was always curious how they were reacting, and their body language sold shock and dismay. I think they knew their case got a lot harder. And I've talked to Hulk Hogan about this multiple times. I interviewed him, and he asked me in the middle of the interview, do you think I saved Vince McMahon from prison? And I don't know that he would have been found guilty either way, because it was a tough case. The government there were a lot of things Vince was guilty of, but the letter of the law may not have been one of them. And so I don't know, but Hogan kind of made it exponentially more difficult for the prosecution. And I also don't think Hogan lied. I think Hogan could have said things that would have made Vince look bad, but I think Hogan saying Vince never told me to take steroids was true. Was there an economic incentive? Did everyone look around and seeing the people getting the top spots had muscles, and the way to have those muscles with the schedule they had was to take steroids? Sure. But Vince didn't go around telling people, here's where you get them and you better take them. He might say, you look like you're not working out very hard. But that's a difference. There's a significant legal difference between those two things. And I think Hogan was completely accurate in his portrayal of it. And, I think Hogan thinks Vince should appreciate that, if not owe him for it. But what Hogan did, I think, was tell the truth.
I agree with you, Wade. And I've heard multiple times, I've heard, Hulk go into conversations when there's no one else around about that. And it's essentially what you described. And he was nervous. He looked nervous. He was scared to death, but he was sweating bullets.
Yep. Because he said he was worried they were going to go after him if he didn't do what they wanted him to. But that's why once he got immunity, he could be less nervous, but still walking past Vince after not seeing him for a while.
That's what made him the most nervous.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that's such history.
Hey, Wade, you were there, and I'm sure you were watching Vince and probably Linda really close. Were there other talents there? Anybody representing Hulk from the locker room, or representing Vince from the locker room?
Not in an official way. Like in the audience.
I mean supportive, just hanging out.
No. It was just Vince and his family and his attorneys. Okay. No. I think it was either Off or Sika was there and like mouthing to the jury sometimes, not guilty. That was about it. But yeah, there weren't a lot. But obviously there was a lot of people testifying but they weren't in the audience watching. But
how did the family react when Hulk gave his testimony? Were they visibly surprised?
Good question. Honestly, I'd have to go back and read my coverage to realize that. I don't think I was in the audience and they were in the audience, but I suspect they were in the front row. So I just was looking at the back of their heads. Sure. So yeah, I honestly, I just don't have a recall of that. I probably wrote about it. It's in the back issues of the Person Torch newsletter. If I saw anything, I'm sure.
Where can we find those back issues, Wade? As long as we're talking about this shit, let's make some money while we're doing it. pwtorch.com/govip. We have back issues dating back to the late 1980s. I was just rereading my coverage of something I think we're going to get to, which is a Bret Hart screw job. And I'm fascinated with my coverage of that. It's actually really fun to go back and listen. Conrad, can I give like a coupon? I'm going to make this up now, but can I give a coupon code so people can get into?
Yes.
All right. So Conrad 24. That's easy to remember. I'll remember that. I'll create a coupon. If people want to get in for get a whole month for $1, is that too low? Should I do $2, Conrad? What do you think?
Hey, go for $1. Why not? It's the dollar menu
right.
with Wade Keller, by God.
All right. That's cheaper than I've done in a long time. But I mean, this is a new audience, and I'm proud of my work, and there's a lot of stuff there. So $1 for a month. pwtorch.com/govip. When you're on the sign up form for the regular VIP subscription, not the Patreon option, but the regular VIP, enter Conrad24, and we'll knock enough off the price. You get the full month for $1. Thank you, Conrad.
Nice.
Appreciate the time to plug it.
No, listen, it's great because I'll tell you, nobody had more in-depth coverage, and just the breakdown of the steroid trial from someone who was there was worth it. But I actually became a full-time subscriber because of your coverage of the Montreal Screwjob, which you're right,
wow.
we're going to get to. I started subscribing in November of 1997, a subscription I maintain to this day. If you're not subscribed to the Torch, you're missing out. Go use that promo code Conrad24. How do you beat $1? Go check it out. See what you think.
And that's a ton of podcasts too that are compatible with Apple Podcasts too. Like it's new podcasts every day. We have 18 years ago flashbacks we put up almost every day. It's podcasts, it's ad-free access to our website, and then our archives, which we have year by year listing of all our cover stories I've written and editorials on all these big stories that I know you guys love talking about. It was such a fun time.
I'm just going to say this, Wade, and I mean this sincerely. I used to want to strangle you back in the day.
Yep.
There were.
It's hard to hear the truth
times, there. Were
Sorry, you're complimenting me. I need to shut up.
We started asking if anybody knew your address. But I have also said on this show, and Conrad can attest to this many times, that your coverage over the last 5, 10, 15 years is really, I really appreciate it and respect the work you guys do over there.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. It means a lot. I mean, obviously you're in a public position, and you make decisions that, I don't just report news, I editorialize on it. And I've said, been critical of things you've said and done, but I've also very, very, very much stood up for what a difference you made in the industry. The vision you had, the execution you had, the difficult waters you had to traverse at times with the people you dealt with. I still look back, and I'm rewatching, the Monday Night War chapter and all this, and I just think about knowing you sort of before all this happened, and I don't know if proud is the word, but I'm impressed. I watch what you were able to do and within the corporate system and the vision you had, and to execute something that changed the course of the industry. And nobody should take that away from you, no matter how they feel about you. That is absolutely just a fact.
Appreciate that. All right, let's wrap this show up. It's never going to get any better.
They're all talking about Vince McMahon and the documentary that Netflix just dropped. Eric and I are going to be breaking this down episodically, day by day.
What I've seen so far is some of the best documentary storytelling I've ever seen in a documentary.
He just straight up says, I didn't want to be pro wrestling. I wanted to be more than pro wrestling.
It was probably grueling enough to get what they did get out of it. Vince likes to control what the perception of Vince McMahon is.
Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications bell, and tell your friends to join us. We're looking to be interactive. We want to know what you thought of the documentary. So if you've got a question for Eric, please keep them coming. Welcome to the program and to our conversation today, Mr. Pat LaPrade. Pat, how are you, man?
Very good, very good. Thanks for the invitation.
I can't believe this is real. The one and only Wade Keller from the Pro Wrestling Torch. Wade, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. Although Conrad, you didn't tell me Eric was going to be part of this either.
Tune in tomorrow. Even Eric doesn't know who's going to show up. 5 p.m. Eastern, 83weeks.com. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications bell. We'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern, breaking down all things Mr. McMahon on Netflix right here at 83weeks.com.